In this video, we're going to cover some of the basic reports that you'll use every day in PortalPay. You can find all the reports here under the report menu. We're going to start with the daily payment report. The daily payment report is a listing of all successful transactions for a given date range. You have a from and a to, which allows you to choose it, a date range. It defaults just to today's date. If you have multiple companies in AutoStar, it allows you to just select, just type in the name of the one company that you want to pull the information from. You can also scope for payment methods, checking, savings, or credit cards, and the status, such as canceled, charged back, pending, and we'll kind of go through what all those mean here in a little bit. Once you've selected all your options, I'm going to widen my date range here a little bit. We're just simply going to tell it to search, and the report begins building in the background. Once the report pops up, you'll see it here. It just have the daily payment report, the main dealership name up here, and the individual company name here. If you have multiple companies, the report will subtotal by those individual companies and then give you a grand total at the end. At the main top here, you've got the payment date. Of course, that's the date that the payment was processed or actually run. Contract information. This name on the payment method is the name. It's a name attached to the credit card or checking account that was used to take this payment. Payment method here indicates what type of payment method was used, and the username here. Now, the username means the person who either took the payment, or if it was a one-time future or scheduled recurring, it was the person who set the payment up. That might be an employee of your company, or if your customer logged in as a buyer and set the payment up themselves or took the payment themselves, their name would be in there. The payment type here, this one tells you that it's a one-time payment, which means one time means someone just took a payment. The other types of payments that you can have are one-time future, and it would indicate it in that box, or recurrings. The auto tracking number is a unique number given to every transaction taken through PortalPay for your company. It starts from the very first payment you take on the first day when you start with PortalPay and just continually proceeds. And it means that each transaction has a unique ID in our system. This is a checking type payment with a status of pending. Now, pending status, we talked a little bit about it. Pending status means that the check payment has been taken today, but it hasn't yet batched up to the processor. That happens at approximately 4:15 to 4:30 every day. Once it's batched has been uploaded, then that would be success. Date scheduled. The date scheduled in this case, you see, matches the payment date. That just means that this is a one-time payment, and so it puts the same date as the payment date in the date scheduled. In the case where it was a recurring or one-time future, the date scheduled is the date that it was set up. Like, for instance, your cashier collector set up a recurring schedule for a customer a year ago for the entire schedule, and one of the payments ran on the 11th. That date scheduled would be the date from a year ago. Okay, so it also tells you, which user that was, okay, that set that up. So you can go back and kind of have a record of what date it was scheduled and who scheduled it. Convenience fees, for those that do charge convenience fees, it'll break that out here as a portion of the total. What the actual payment amount was applied towards the balance, whether that was a main balance or a side note balance, and then the total amount of the transaction here that would be submitted to the credit card processor or to that customer's bank account under their checking or savings. The next report that I want to cover is what's called the exception payment report. You ever had a declined card and a customer swearing that the money's there and you try to run it again and you're not sure why it's getting declined? Well, the exception report is a real handy place where you can go look and see exactly what the reason for the decline is. So we're going to select the exception payment report. Widen our from. Again, you can search for a particular name on a payment method or one for a specific contract number. If the customer's standing there or on the phone with you and you have their contract number handy, you can just enter their contract number in. And of course, this has ability to scope for checking and savings, but it's primarily used for credit card transactions that are declined. So as you see on the exception payment report, you'll have a list of contracts here whose credit cards were declined for a given date range. The contract number is, of course, the contract number. That tracking number is that unique ID we spoke about a moment ago. The name on the credit card, any convenience fees that may have been associated with that, payment, what the amount of the payment was, that the error was declined, and why it was declined. Okay, so you'll see here this response column, that's called a response reason code, and this is the secret code that tells us what happened. Now, I know just from having great familiarity with this that a 2 is just a standard decline. You presented the transaction to the cardholder's bank and they said, yep, there's no money in there. However, there's some other here that you'll see that aren't as common. Like, for example, we have this one here they tried to run twice, and it's for the same person, and it's a code 44. So how do you find out what these codes mean? Well, we're processing typically processing through Authorize.net or USA ePay if you're on PortalPay, and Authorize.net has a handy little tool that I use here called the Response Reason Code tool. So if you'll just go to google.com, type in Response Reason Code tool, and this will be the first thing that pops up. Click on the link, save it to your shortcuts. Okay? So, because this is instead of having a list to deal with or document, this is the neatest little thing. You just type in 44 and submit. And wait a second, and it'll tell you that the transaction has been declined and give you exactly what the reasons are. Okay? So this says that the transaction didn't match the card code on file at the card issuing bank. Okay, so they had the security code on the back of the card, I guess, was incorrect. That's what this one means. Let's take another example here. We've got a 65 here for this client here. So we'll type in 65, and it says that the transaction was declined because the merchant configured their account to reject transactions with a certain value for card code mismatch. So this was another one related to that card code mismatch. So this is a real handy tool that I like to use. So getting back to here, you have another one you'll see here that's a code 11. It looks like the same person. If you try to run a card against an account within 2 minutes of each other, okay, that's 2 minutes for the same amount, you'll get a code 11, and I see that frequently. What happens is you'll attempt to process a payment, it'll give a failure, and the customer will say, try it again. You need to wait more than 2 minutes, because at that point Auth.net's going to reject it whether the money's there or not, because they see it as a potential duplicate transaction. Last but not least is the return report. Remember, I like to think of the exception payment report as the credit card decline report. Well, what about ACH payments? If you take ACH payments, you do know that you occasionally have returns, and so we're going to open up the return report for that. You'll see at the top you have 4 boxes with the dates in it. You have the from and to at the top, and the return from and to at the bottom. Now what this means is I want all the checks that were written between the date that's currently highlighted. So usually I'll just go all the way back. I'll just change the year to 2010 to today that have been written that obviously were returned today. This is a good way to widen the scope of when the potential checks were written, but all the ones that came back today, because sometimes you'll have a check that may have been written or the payment date may have been the weekend date or Saturday date, but they didn't get batched until Monday. So you want to see all the ones from today that were written between Saturday and Monday. Okay, so we're going to leave this here, and we're simply going to click search. And the return report here is going to have, of course, the name that the payment was submitted under, Philippa Cook in this case. It's also going to tell you the reason, invalid account number. Okay, normally that means someone just mistyped the checking or savings account number. NSFs, of course, will list as insufficient funds. So this is pretty self-explanatory, but it does give you a list of all the ones that have come back today that were written between a certain date range.